Thank you all for coming. It's a great thrill to be here. It's a little bit of a reunion. I walked into seeing a number of more than familiar faces back from the old days and some new friends. You're helping me transition from being a spiritual consumer in this wonderful, wonderful country of ours to perhaps beginning to be a spiritual producer as well. So I thank you for the opportunity. Many of you don't know who I am, although some of you probably see a faint glint of recognition. I was a poster boy for America's Most Wanted for a couple of decades. That has something to do with my running here. Actually, it's not Interpol who's after me, but some other people. We're not going to go into that right now. I have worked with the Simon Wiesenthal Center and associate institutions for 4 decades. I came to Los Angeles straight out of Kollel to give a shiur in an academic institution. And Leigh Brigler, one of my first talmidim there. Eventually I got shifted to the Simon Wiesenthal side. Simon Wiesenthal Center is the largest Jewish membership group in North America with over 400,000 paying families. I stress paying, that counts a lot in the Jewish world. And we've worked for decades as influence peddlers. Originally we were into Holocaust memorialization and protecting survivors, but that shifted. That shifted decades ago. We're now a leading human rights organization with standing in the European Parliament and the South American Parliament and capitals around the world, in state government, local government, international government, NGOs, United Nations. I say this not to brag so much as to show the complexity of life today if you're trying to do things for the Jewish people. It used to be in the old days, you know, you lived in New York, so if you owned 3 congressmen and a half a senator, and you're okay. And then you have, I won't mention his name, in the state assembly, you got things wrapped up. And if you could throw in one cardinal who you were friendly with, that's it, you're an Olam Haba, you've got it. That's no longer the case. Today, to be of influence in a very rapidly changing world, you have to have standing in all kinds of different places, which is really part of what we're going to talk about. If you're going to start getting nervous, well, who does all these things, and where do we find the people to help us? Well, then you're ahead of the game because you're figuring out what some of this is going to lead to. My particular role at the Wiesenthal Center is really twofold. I do a good deal of writing together with my colleague, really my boss, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Associate Dean of the Center, and I'm in charge of Interfaith affairs. We try to call it really multi-faith affairs and make the differentiation. We're not into the old ecumenical stuff of, well, you believe in one God, we believe in 3 gods, why don't we split the difference and we'll all sing some, kumbaya together. That's not the kind of stuff that we do. We try to build on the power of faith to get things done when they should be done for the Jewish people, and if you're intuitive, you can figure out that it doesn't work unless you're ready to reciprocate. And we stand ready to reciprocate. I've been in some pretty strange places. I will admit that it's a great job for somebody who's passive-aggressive, because half of my job is to find friends for the Jewish people, and half of my job is to find the bad guys and make life miserable for them. And we do a pretty good job at that, too. More for that in the future. So did you hear the one about the town anti-Semite back in Eastern Europe? Stupid question. What do you mean everybody was an anti-Semite? What's a town anti-Semite? Well, there was this one guy in this little town who was just known to be over the top, the worst anti-Semite around. And one day he kind of surprised his family. He came back home from a doctor's visit, and he announced that the doctor said that he had about a year to live, and he's going to mend his ways. He wants to convert to Judaism. Call the rabbi. So they try to get the rabbi to come down, right? Like, he doesn't know if he'll ever walk out of the guy's house again, but they prevail upon him. They insist, look, hey, guy's turning over a new leaf. He's a dying man. How can you say no? The rabbi comes. He listens to the guy. He seems to be sincere. He works with him for about 11 months, comes a couple of times a week, learns with him, till he's finally ready to take the plunge, takes him to the mikvah, comes back, and a few days later, he falls into his deathbed. He's a dying man, surrounded by his family. He looks up at the heavens with a look of utter serenity on his face, smiling, and his last words as his soul departs his body, "Thank God, one less Jew in the world." So that kind of sums up what we thought of them and what they thought of us for lots of people. And for Ashkenazic Jews, for hundreds of years, it's a bit of an extreme, but not that much. Our experience with the non-Jewish world was miserable. In the Sephardic world, it was almost miserable. People make too much of how much better it was in the Sephardic world. It was better, but it depends on the time, it depends on the country. And I remember paying a shiva call a couple of years ago to a colleague in Los Angeles who was the son of the chief rabbi of Tehran. He remembers as a child visiting his grandfather who had a carpet factory. He used to learn in the loft. He sat there learning the whole time, and he used to come down regularly and see what the workers were doing. But he said every community around was beset by people who were Muslims of Jewish ancestry, forced converts over the last century. It's not a pretty picture. Question is, have things changed? So there are two sides that are going at each other. There are people who argue, well, some things have changed. After World War II, every American church, really every Western church, announced a new attitude towards Jews. The Catholics put teeth into it. Catholics change very, very, very slowly. But when they change, because they're hierarchical, because there's a power structure, that change means something. Not every Catholic anti-Semite suddenly changed his stripes. But Catholic schools stopped teaching anti-Semitism. They started teaching about the Holocaust. They started teaching positive things about Israel. There are circles around in which, liberal circles, where if you're Catholic, you just haven't made it unless you do a Pesach Seder. There's an ongoing controversy, Jews and Catholics, whether it's appropriate for Catholics who can't find a Jewish Seder to go to do a Catholic Jewish Seder, just to have the experience. So some people think that things have changed. And then there's the personal experiences that we have. The joke that I told sounds funny, but it doesn't resonate with the experience that many of us have with trusted friends and colleagues for decades, sometimes multi-generational. Is something going on that's different? Or are we just, speaking to the wrong people? So some people think that, well, a sizable number of people have changed, and maybe we have to change as well. And then there's the other side. How many Orthodox Jews does it take to change a light bulb? Change? Hell no, we won't go. The Zayda never had a good thing to say about a guy, so I'm not going to either. We could go back into history a long time ago and read about John Chrysostom, 4th century, one of the early church fathers. Oh, the guy had a way, he was called the golden tongue because he really did have a way with words. You know, sometimes we are a little irritated by some of our friends. But we would never come up with language like, the most miserable of all men, lustful, rapacious, greedy, perfidious bandits, inveterate murderers, destroyers, men possessed by the devil. Debauchery and drunkenness have given them the manners of the pig and the lusty goat. Pests of the universe, they have surpassed the ferocity of wild beasts, for they murder their offspring. I guess they went to the same Kiddush Shabbos morning after Shul. But now this is strong stuff, and people devoured this stuff for centuries. And this is the tip of the iceberg. And then we have, you know, in more modern times, you know, we just passed Yom HaShoah. How many stories do we have to tell? But the one that's probably the most meaningful to me is that of Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel, who, as you know, jumped the train to Auschwitz, clawed his way out of a boxcar, got out, basically survived the war and died of a broken heart, of the memories of a Jewish people that wouldn't listen to him. But at one point he succeeded in getting a meeting with a Vatican representative in Romania. He was trying to arrange for protection just for some children. And he was turned down. And this is what the fellow said, the papal representative in Romania. Being Sunday, neither I nor Father Tissot concern ourselves with profane affairs. So Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel challenged them. Profane affairs, we're talking about the lives of 10,000 children. Innocent children. Is the death of innocent children profane? The response was, there is no innocent blood of Jewish children in the world. All Jewish blood is guilty. You must die. This is the punishment that has been awaiting you for that sin. Now, we're a people that have made memory a mitzvah. It's hard to shake this stuff loose no matter what you see. So there is room for an ongoing debate. I have my bias, which not necessarily because it's what I do for a living. You know, you can do something for a living and that's just what you have to do. It happens to be that I actually believe it. But, you know, you knew I was biased before you got here. But I can certainly understand the other side. Now, why is it important that we talk about this? I've got it down to 2 practical issues and 1 theoretical issue. The 2 practical issues, one of them I call friends, allies, and enemies. Sneaky. I didn't call it 3 issues, I call it 1 issue. Right? Okay, that way you think that we're coming to an end. We're not really, but that's... Okay, friends, we're coming up on Yom HaAtzmaut. I hope some of you are taking advantage of a marvelous service that's offered. I think the name of the organization is Toldot Israel. In the 5 days before Yom HaAtzmaut, they're sending 1 video out a day. It's a good way to get into the spirit of things. To understand what a wonderful, wonderful thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us in giving us back our country. So I just watched the first segment today. One of the things that was mentioned was it was about the vote, the UN vote in fall of 1947, and the people who worked on it. So they mentioned that Haiti was one of the swing votes, and they were undecided and they were trying very hard. Who did they send to the president of Haiti to get him to? And it worked. It was a pastor, Protestant pastor. You know that a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago by now, President Trump announced that he's moving the consulate, the embassy here to Yerushalayim from what I hear from very, very highly placed sources, actually evangelical circles, people closest to the president at the moment. That date is still on. It may change, but contrary to what people are saying, that date is still calendared. The folks that convinced Harry Truman, besides his partner, who were the ones who were making all the phone calls to the White House? Harry Truman didn't even win the Jewish vote in New York after he recognized the state of Israel. But evangelical Christians, and at that time it wasn't just evangelicals. It was lots and lots of Christians. And AIPAC does great work. They should continue to do great work. But it pales in comparison, just numerically, with the support we've gotten for 7 decades from Christian communities. This is so important to us. I would need a couple of hours to describe to you what's going on and how crucial it is. All I can tell you is circles that you would not believe. I'm talking about like right-wing Haredi circles that Baruch Hashem, I have access to them, and they really grew up in that milieu. People who've told me, Yitzchak, go ahead, full steam ahead in what you're doing. This is sakana for the Jewish people. We cannot afford to lose their friendship. The people who are closest to Trump right now are evangelicals. I know a good couple of them personally, and work with them. And after the president announced that he's moving the embassy, you'll recall that there was one Central American country that said, "Me too, we're doing it also." So you thought, okay, they want money from the United States and Guitar. This is a country that in the last decade, like several other countries, was taken over by evangelical leadership. They had nothing to do with president. They used it as a good excuse. But they wanted to do this purely on religious grounds. We need all the friends that we can get. Even people who are not friends, we need allies. An ally is not the same thing as a friend. They're people who don't agree with each other about anything, don't even like each other too much, but agree that they can work on a common agenda. We've been doing that in the United States, especially in New York, for decades, in issues like aid to schools, and school busing, and end-of-life issues. That didn't mean that necessarily the players liked each other, but you found common cause, right? Wrong. It doesn't work anymore. I'll tell you why it doesn't work anymore. The model, of course, works, but one thing has changed, imperceptibly to most people, but it's real. Unfortunately, it is really real. It used to be in the era of this mythical melting pot of America, and like everybody's identity is cool and great. You mind your business, I mind my business. Everybody respects everybody else, and Jews could fly under the radar. It didn't matter what they were doing as long as it was legal. Halvai. And it didn't matter what their attitudes were towards their neighbors. All that has changed. All that has changed forever. Because today, everybody has access to the biggest Talmud Chacham ever walked the face of the earth since Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbeinu Google. Rabbeinu Google will tell you the answer to anything. It used to be, 50 years ago, you wanted to find out what they were thinking in Williamsburg, you had to send a spy into the mikveh. Today, you don't need any spy in the mikveh. They know what we're doing. They know what we're thinking. Literally, they know our attitudes. Because everything gets out and is magnified. I wish I had more here so I could turn more of it out. And every time you find some kind of an intemperate remark in a Jewish website, and especially the frum websites, there are thousands, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of websites just devoted to taking down Jews, to promoting anti-Semitism. There are trolls out there. They're looking for the material. They take the quotes, and in the space of hours, it's all over the Arab world and all over the world of anti-Semites. So the cure to that is attitude. If our attitude is dismissive and contemptuous of other people, they're going to know about it. They're going to know about it. So what our attitudes are towards other people is increasingly important, and we can't fake it. And then there are enemies. Enemies who, as I just said, pick up on everything that we do. There's a particular version of it that plays out here in Israel. Can't give away too much, but I've had spies and people have been placed in various conferences, anti-Israel conferences here. And one of the favorite things that they do when they bring over people from Europe and America to try to make the case, the Palestinian case, is that they'll take them to particular places. I don't want to mention where, it's probably not fair. And they know that when they get off the bus, the people will be greeted by, believe it or not, nice, polite little Palestinian children who are trained. While if they wait just a few minutes, they will find some Jewish-looking kids who will be throwing rocks at the Arabs. And they don't have to say anything. And they don't have to say anything. Now, if I lived in some of these places, it could be, I'd also be tempted. I'm so sure I'd be tempted to throw the rocks. But it is so self-defeating when you teach children who are not sophisticated enough to know when and where. We hate these people. Schwab, Zechron Livracha, said, if you teach a child what it is to be Tzelem Elokim, to be made in God's image, you have any idea what it means to be in God's image. And you should know, Tayriki, that not only are you created in God's image, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you something more. He turned you into a Jew. He turned you into a Yid. Then you're giving the child something of value. But there's more coming. I spent 9/11 as one of the only people at UCLA campus. There's a meeting arranged by a reporter that two of us knew at the LA Times, a professor of Islamic law. Had written an article about riba, about usury, and about new techniques of getting past it. And she thought it would be a good idea if the two of us met. I was teaching Jewish law at Loyola Law School at the time, so we had a sort of a professional connection, and we decided not to cancel the meeting just because of 9/11. We met, and he told me his story. He was a genuine moderate. He said that he grew up not as a moderate, grew up in Egypt and Kuwait, trained as an imam, trained to hate Jews, trained to think that Jews are the lowest of the low, and had no reason to suspect otherwise. But when he came to the West, he found himself sort of alone, and I think it was at Yale. He said he didn't know anybody, and remarkably, most of the people who befriended him were Jewish. And that led to a crisis of faith. Why? He said, if they lied to me about who the Jews were, what else did they lie to me about? We have children. We know this. We have children who go off the derech because they were taught certain things. And then when they get out there into the world, they find that it's really not true. How could they lie so much? And if they lied about who non-Jews are, what else did they lie about? So this is not easy stuff. So that's one issue. What's the other issue? What's the other issue? Something that's ignored pretty often. Not by this crowd. It's called MS. Even would there be no practical issues around, we still would have to know, what should our attitudes be? Should we be changing our attitudes? Should we not? So what I want to do in the time remaining is to go through some of the sources. I'm going to talk pretty quickly, and I'm going to concentrate on the ones that it's more likely that most people here have not heard of. I'm going to tantalize you with the new material. Everything that I'm doing here is just a way of whetting your palate and your appetite. And there's a lot more to be said, but hopefully this will get you thinking about some issues. Okay, the one that is bandied about the most is the Sifri. Rashi cites it in Chumash. Esav and Yaakov finally meet, and right, Esav and Yaakov embrace, and their little dots on the embrace, and there's a dispute among Tanaim about what it means. One opinion is that he he embraced him. Well, that's the one we're looking at. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says, Halacha biyadua. Halacha, halacha. How many midrashim do you know that start with halacha? Halacha. It's the law. It's a fixed reality. Biyadua. It's known. Esav Sonei Yaakov. Esav hates Yaakov. But at that time, Nichmur Rachamav, his compassion was moved, and he embraced him with a full heart. Okay? So a lot of people skip the second half and look at the first half. Halacha b'yadua Esav hates Yaakov. So hence the title of what we're talking about. Esav who? Who's the Esav here? Who is Esav? There are many people who assume that Esav is either Christianity or the West or all non-Jews. You'll find important names linked to those views. There's one possibility that I didn't mention. Anybody want to help me? What else could Esav mean? Could mean Esav. In fact, I did several times a Bar Ilan search of this medrash and its use in all the Shilas and Shuvas literature, all the midrashim, all the drashas that they had in the collection at the time. There was not a single instance that I could find prior to the 19th century of this Maimer Chazal being used in a universal sense. Now, that does not mean that it's not true. It could just be people assumed it and it didn't have to be stated. You can't prove the null from the null hypothesis. But there is what to talk about here. As a brilliant fellow in London by the name of Chaim Rappaport, brilliant scholar, and he wrote an article in 2015 collecting all of those who believe that Esav Sonei as Yaakov means all non-Jews. It wasn't a particularly big list, but some important names. Shabbos and Shuvas Harei B'Sumim, the Chassan Sofer, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and the last Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, truth be told, I didn't think all of his citations were all that compelling, but let's even assume that it's true. Does that mean that that's the last word? Actually, it turns out not necessarily. That must be a cue for something. A remarkable Yid in New York, real incredible tzaddik, and one of the Gedolim of the same generation as Rav Moshe, Rav Henkin, Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin in two places writes what Avon Pelili Mitzad Osam Hamatifim. A terrible, terrible crime is committed by those people who give drushas all the time on the topic Halacha Hu she'esav sonei li'Yaakov, and that hatred is eternal. Ze neged ha'emes v'neged Chazal v'hamikra. This runs counter to the truth, counter to Chazal, and counter to Scripture. In another article, he said that the Maimer really applies to, who's Esav here? It means Esav. Esav hated Yaakov his whole life, but at this time he changed his ways. And he says, why do Chazal speak in those terms? If they mean anything more than Esav, Rak al dor machrive hamigdosh nishnazeh. We're only talking about the Esav, the non-Jews of their day, the Romans of their day. And they mean to say that even Esav can change his spots and can change his behavior. But there's more. For reasons that I don't understand, maybe because it's just a dumb mistake I'm making, but there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. We had it not too long ago. I know there are at least a few people here in this room who learned Daf Yomi. A little interaction between Rav Yehuda Hanassi and his good old friend Marcus Antonius Aurelius. You know, he was an interesting guy, bankrolled the Mishnah, literally bankrolled the Mishnah. He was the one providing them the monetary support for the project. But they were friends. They were friends. So Antoninus one day was disturbed by a pasuk that he read about Esav and what's going to happen to Esav in the end. This is Avodah Zarah Yud Amud Beis, and he said, "So is there any hope for me?" What did Rabbeinu HaKadosh tell him? Don't worry, I'll work. I'll get you out of Gehenna, or give $50 to Kupada a year. He didn't tell him that. What did he say? He said, Esav means those people who act like Esav. What does it tell you? It means that not everybody who's sort of genealogically, or certainly not everybody who's non-Jewish, has to be Esav. I don't understand why this Gemara is not cited more often. And then, for those of you in the academic circles, I should point out, that Professor Menachem Kahana, and where is it, Bar-Ilan, Hebrew U, he found the earliest edition of the Sifri. Guess what? The phrase is not there. What is in the Sifri is not halacha biyadua, but halo yadua. Halo yadua. And he speculates that in the course of centuries and copy and whatever, halo became abbreviated as hey lamed, and some printed down the line decided that hey lamed must stand for halacha, and it made its way into every text. Now, it doesn't mean that that was the original text, and maybe it doesn't even matter. The sources in the text that we have are also part of divine providence. It's also bahashgacha, so it also means something. I'm not staking my case just on this alone, but it is something to think about. But maybe more importantly, the comments of the Netziv. The Netziv, if you only look at one source after this, to keep it in your arsenal, to show somebody else who's being kind of obstreperous in the other direction, look at the Netziv on the pasuk. On the pasuk. What does the Netziv say? He says that v'chein ledoros, just as Esav was moved at that moment in brotherly love, v'chein ledoros, similarly throughout the future, b'shah shezera Esav misorim beruach tahara, when the descendants of Esav will be moved with a spirit of purity, lahakir ezera Yisrael u'malasam, to recognize the Jews and their elevated station, oz gam anachnu misorim lahakir es Esav, we also are moved to recognize Esav, ki achinu hu, he is our brother. And if you don't believe the Netziv, a close relative of his, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Devarim also talks about achenu Esav. We tend to gloss over that, but that is what he's called. Okay, so that's non-Jews in general. What about Christians in particular? We have our own set of complaints and axes to grind with them. So I'm going to give you some stuff that will give you what to think about. Is Christianity avodah zarah? For Jews, categorically yes. I don't know of anyone who disputes that. If a Jew is forced to either accept Christianity or die, it's a no-brainer. Has to accept death. Is Christianity avodah zarah for non-Jews? So I'm sure half of the people in the room say, yeah, there's the famous Tosfos and the Ramah, and when the Tosfos says that Shituf, a kind of a shared divinity, is not problematic for non-Jews, and everybody yells at the Ramah, not everybody, but a lot of Achronim, no, that's not what Tosfos means. It just means in the transgression of bringing a non-Jew to an oath, there's no problem if they talk about God plus something else. There are people around who will tell you the halacha is very, very clear. It's avodah zarah, it's idolatry for non-Jews, it's a violation of one of the 7 mitzvahs ben Noach. I'm not so certain that it's so clear. I thought that it's sort of balanced, in that you have about as many on one side as the other, but I'm not playing posek tonight. But what is overlooked is the following question. We live in very strange times. Very strange times. Let me ask you a pointed binary question. What do we want? What does the Torah want? What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want? Let's say Christianity would be Avodah Zarah. Is it better to be an Ovid of Avodah Zarah or an atheist? And prove it. Time's up. The answer you're supposed to give is, of course, Ibn Ezra, in the run-up to Aseret HaDibros, Perek Chaf, in his long Hakdama. I think I have the quote here. Well, I had it at some point. But what he says is, there's no question that the Aveira of rejecting divinity altogether is far worse than idolatry. And intuitively, it should be the case. An idol worshiper recognizes that there's something greater than me, than the human being. And there's always room to correct the misimpression. Some of the Meforshim in the Haggadah say, why is Terach called one of our Avos? Ain't my Av. I start with Avram. So they say that Terach did teach us something. He taught us the idea of submission to a higher being. That's significant. We live in a time when, for the first time in who knows how long, millennia, atheism is becoming a serious option for many people, and one that's growing by leaps and bounds. United States military now has atheist chaplains. Figure that one out. Atheist chaplains. And all the Pew reports show how atheism is growing. Do we have a vested interest in making sure that people retain some kind of a connection with the idea of God? My guess would be yes. My guess is that we're going to be far better off as a Jewish community living in a world where people believe in some higher authority. But you don't have to go to Adlerstein. You can go to a Radak in Malachim Beis. It's the famous incident with the would-be converts, and Hashem is sending the lions out, and they get scared, they convert. So in the aftermath of that, there's one mysterious pasuk which talks about Kohanim, our Kohanim, who were sent out to some of these different peoples to speak to them, each according to his own God. So the Radak says that what these Kohanim did, was they pulled them away from pure idolatry to a tamer form of false belief, in which there was a chief God who was responsible for everything, and he had his underlings. To us, that's Avodah Zarah. To us, that's Avodah Zarah. But you should know, there's a pasuk in Devarim, Perek Dalid, which maybe hasn't hit you over the head, but the pasuk talks about how Hashem took the stars and all the heavenly bodies, Asher chalak Hashem la'amin. Hashem divided them, apportioned them to the nations. I know that's only one translation. The other one is Echlika. But there's one view that HaKadosh Baruch Hu apportioned them to the non-Jews. What does that mean? There's a slew of Rishonim and Achronim that say that for them, they are governed by intermediaries. There are things between them and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the real winner is the Akedah Yitzchok. Akedah Yitzchok, so often overlooked, because he writes so much. Today, if you can't get something down to a 3-minute video, you have no chance of getting heard. Yitzchok Arama would not make it today. But in the Shar Pei Ches, he says, you don't find that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ever got angry at those people who worshipped heavenly beings. You know, he doesn't like Baal Peor and Ashtaris and this Baal and that Baal. But those who worship the sun and the moon and who knows what, Alpha Centauri and Star Wars and Star Trek. Oh, I'm veering off in the wrong direction. You don't find that HaKadosh Baruch Hu got too angry at them. Why not? So he says a remarkable thing. He says, quoting this pasuk in Devarim Daled, Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha osam l'chol ha'amim, that shituf, that believing in a kind of shared divinity, is just not so wrong for non-Jews. They cannot be held accountable to believe in the purity of the oneness of God that we were. They weren't at Sinai. They did not have the same relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So for what they're doing, if they believe in a one God, and the truth is that, there are like hundreds of millions of Hindus who claim that they're monotheists. With a collection of 100 gods, they still claim that they're monotheists. What do they mean? They mean that the ultimate reality behind everything else, on top of everything, even on top of the famous Hindu Trinity, is one God. So is that Avodah Zarah for us? 100%. Is it Avodah Zarah for them? Mixed. We have two different views. Put it all together. And there's one other factor. And that's it, and then we'll let you out of your misery. And that is remarkable Rambam in two or three chuvas. The Rambam is asked, is it true that non-Jews are not allowed to learn Torah and we're not allowed to teach them Torah? So the Rambam, as you know, did not like Christianity very much. Has some really strong words about Christianity. I don't know if he ever met a Christian in his life. Muslims he suffered from, and has great things to say about Islamic monotheism. The Rambam is honest. So he writes that of course it's asur. The Gemara says it's asur, and you should not study Torah with a Muslim. Christians are different. Why? Because Christians believe in our scripture. And if you learn scripture with them properly, he says, I don't know how he could say this, but he did. He says, I don't believe that they're going to distort the meaning of the text. Which I guess nishtana hateva. They certainly they changed, but it's still for the Rambam to say it in his time that because of scripture, there is something there that if you teach them properly, maybe they'll even come back. And the Sridei Yesh, Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, in a couple of chuvas, Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg says that coming back doesn't mean that they're going to convert to Yiddishkeit. It means that they'll see the truth. They'll understand what their role is in the world. They'll understand what the Jewish people's role is in the world. They'll give honor to the Torah and to Jews. And if you don't recognize that going on in the world today, then see your optometrist for a new prescription. We live in a time where there is so much pressure against belief, and they are so unprepared for what's going on that they are clamoring for some kind of chizuk from us. Sometimes literally clamoring, sometimes just subconsciously. The ones who've accepted the idea, and it's not just Catholics following the Pope's speech at the Kotel, but who buy into the idea that, to quote their text, that their limbs grafted onto the tree, the trunk, and the trunk is Jewish, who see that in different terms today, who see that there is something eternal about Jews, and that Jews have insight into things because of the Torah. They're not going to convert, but they think that we received God's word before they did, and they're looking desperately for us. I could tell you stories, I'm not going to do it on camera, of people who I deal with I'm not the only one doing it, that's for sure. But some people very much connected to the administration. One remarkable fellow who, after spending time with Rabbi Heyer and Rabbi Cooper and myself, told us one day, he says, when he has a small problem, he goes to his Protestant colleagues. When he has a major problem, he goes to Orthodox rabbis. He's not the first or the second person that I've heard that from. And that's the way it should be. Now, for 2,000 years, we had no opportunity, if anybody came to us with such a proposal, to respond to it. Because the next day, he'd change his mind, or his son would assume power and be off with our heads. And maybe that'll happen a year from now. But at the moment, maybe we live in a little bit of a bubble. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu do such a thing? You know, I have to get really, really dense for the real deep people here who know the Ramchal well and know Das Tunos and the Sod HaYichud. The essential thesis is that the ultimate way of making Hashem one in the world is when you conquer and you overcome the most serious objections to His oneness. And what is that, ultimately? What's the most serious challenge to the oneness of God? Evil. So it's when Klal Yisrael survives and is able to look evil straight in the face, which we can do plenty of here, and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can't push us away, and we don't understand it because we're basar v'dam, we're flesh and blood. But we can handle it. We can do it. It's not somehow a steer to who you are. We refuse to believe that it is. That shows the ultimate triumph of Hashem. B'zer Anpin, on a smaller level. Think of the beauty, of the irony of HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking people who for 2,000 years were the cudgel that he used against us, Chas v'Shalom, when he wanted to have to punish us, and to take them and turn them into friends, allies, and even friends. I have no quibble with those who won't hear any of this, who are on the verge of barfing by listening to it. We have a history, and we have too many naive people who are willing at the drop of a hat to say, yeah, things have changed, they're different. It's not always the case. We have to learn the lessons of history. Here in Israel, the problem is intensified by the problem of, like you mentioned before, of proselytizing. That there are Christian groups that proselytize openly. There are Christian groups that are more nefarious. They'll tell you they're not proselytizing, and they really are. But there are groups that don't proselytize. There are groups that understand that they want a relationship with the Jewish people, and they understand how contemptible it is that proselytizing goes on, and they'll agree to behave. You find some groups, Catholics are struggling with this. For those who are really interested, I can point you to a remarkable document published about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. Was it 2.5 years ago? Something like that. I know what the document is, by the Pontifical Commission on Relationship with the Jews, in which they said, we don't understand why it's not a contradiction to our theology, but we know it is true. Jews somehow have their way of being recognized by God. They don't need to be saved by us. And Catholics don't proselytize. And if they were, they'd proselytize less the Jews. There are other groups that they're not always the most astute theologians, but they'll say, we would love for you to recognize our Savior. But that's your business. Maybe one day he'll come, you'll accept him. In the meantime, we understand you live in the holiness of the way you conduct your lives and the greatness of the Torah. They need that Torah. As a friend of mine, a Anglican theologian, put it, he said, what evidence of any sort, give me biblical evidence, any evidence, that God will keep His promise over a long period of time, even for people who are unworthy? Where? There's only one place. The Jews. The Jews. So we need that. If there's nothing to that, then we have no assurance as Christians. So, Chazal say that Ezer Chacham Haroes Hanolad. I believe, you're free to accept it or not, that there is a Nolad. I can't tell you how long it'll last, but that there are remarkable opportunities. And I'm an opportunist. I think that there's an opportunity to be taken, carpe diem, grab it. We should take the opportunity. All of you who want can sign up with me afterwards. There are always groups, I mean seriously, groups of visiting Christians coming through. If we don't get them, the Palestinians do. And there is nothing more powerful to sell Christians on a connection with the Jewish people on a trip to Israel, I've heard this from them, than a Friday, than a Leil Shabbos Suda in a genuinely Orthodox home. With multiple generations, with good food, with Divrei Torah. People will spend 10 days here going to all the places up north that the average Christian hasn't heard of, and they'll say the most memorable experience is Friday night at an Orthodox home. And I'll be looking for hosts. Okay, any questions? We have some questions. I never would have thought. Okay, Rebbetzin Rigler.
I make an emotional distinction between American Christians, maybe because I grew up with them, and European non-Jews, who largely they are not so Christian, just non-Jews, who have a 2,000-year record of murdering Jews. At our Shabbos table yesterday, we were having a discussion about tshuva, and I said, I believe that all Jews can do tshuva, but I do not believe that European non-Jews can do tshuva. But I think the Germans are just as anti-Semitic as they ever were. I didn't trust them at all. What is Rabbi Adlerstein's opinion about European non-Jews?
So my opinion doesn't matter so much. I'll tell you that I have one colleague who works particularly with European Jews. Brilliant guy here in Harnof. Christians.
Non-Jews.
Yeah. Chaim Eisen in Harnof. And he works particularly with European Christians. And look, they're an embattled minority. That's part of why I think many of them are doing tshuva. I think anybody can do tshuva. I think we have to be not naive and look for the signs of it. There are reasons why people do tshuva. And it happens to be with European Christians that there were whole communities of people who were Moser Nefesh in the Holocaust and throughout bloody European history. Dennis Prager likes pointing out that when Jews had to take refuge someplace, when they had to run, the place that they ran to usually was some church figure. Sometimes they got turned in, but often they were protected. You have especially people in the Calvinist tradition in France, those remarkable communities in France, and a couple of them died in the process. And they did it on religious grounds. So it's not, the problem with the world is it's never black and white. There are always shades of gray. I think there are some, there are people worthwhile talking about. There are communities in Europe today, and every time there's some new outrage and BDS does this and BDS does that, so European churches say, well, if they're boycotting this company, we're going to start a campaign to buy from that company. It's actually a tool that we use. We try to point out to some of the BDS people that every time they have a new boycott of some product, it actually means that more of the product is sold. It's two good questions. I'm not as much of an expert in Rav Kook as I should be, although I do believe that Rav Kook's approach is one of the most crucial things to convey to young people today. Much of what ails the Jewish community coming out of the liberal wing is a false kind of universalism. People who just are not comfortable with the idea of attributing any specialness to the Jewish people, to anything. That's really what's behind Europe. Nationalism is a crime because we had all these world wars here because of nationalism. Privilege. Let's all be one happy country like the EU, and let's see how that lasted. But Rav Kook is one of the most explicit about the difference between the Jewish neshama and the non-Jewish neshama, which is thoroughly detested in academic circles. They blame it on Rav Yehuda Halevi and the Balatanya, and sometimes they don't realize that Rav Kook did it as well. It wouldn't stop them really. But it's true, Rav Kook does very, very explicit about it. Rav Kook is also far and away beyond anyone that I know in hundreds of years, a universalist. And the two are not contradictory to each other.
They seem to be.
Kook they're not. There's just so much there in Rav Kook about a universal message, about how the embrace of a Jew has to start off with himself, with his spouse, with his children, with his community, with his people, until it embraces the entire earth. That's common places in Rav Kook. Somehow, it's not contradictory. I can explain why it's not, but I don't have the time right now. But it's not, and that's important. I don't know which Christians he was talking about and whether he would say the same thing if he met Christians who were manifestly different. It often is a perfume. There's no question about it. Now, that's what Rav Moshe wrote. Even if they act sweet, they're really after something. But I've met people who don't seem to be after. I could be wrong. I could be naive.
Okay.
But I'm in the company of a lot of other people. Okay. What was the second question?
The second question was someone stood up and delivered a Dvar Torah and he used the
Yimach
phrase Yeshu Yimach Shemo. And he cited his.
There's a lot in the literature to support that.
Oh, okay.
Look at it all, starting from the Gemara, which may or may not be talking about him, the descriptions. It's very hard to believe that the Yeshu in the Gemara really was the 1/3 of the Christian Trinity, because he's put at a period of time about 150 years before. But some have Terutzim for that. It's a Machlokas Rishonim. There were Rishonim who believed that he was, and Rishonim who believed that he wasn't. In one of the great church debates in Europe, one of the Bali Tosas swore up and down that the Yeshu in the Gemara is not Jesus. We suffered so much. There was so much of a distortion of the essence of Hashem through Christianity. I don't want us to be naive about the negatives. That Megalgal and Skosal Yedei Zakai, whoever it was who started this whole mess, maybe should be seen with the most utter contempt. Okay, it's a view. It's a view. There are other views. And then there's a third. Even if you don't buy the other view, to say such things today puts the Jewish people in danger. To say it when other people can hear, and they always hear everything, puts the Jewish people in danger. To train students to think that way when not every student is so discerning. I'll give you a very, very, very small example. Some of you were probably shocked that I said the word Jesus. The people in my family were shocked. People always said Yeshu. I said it. And I was so careful about doing it that even when I did radio shows, I would find some circumlocution. I talk about him or this. I found a way not to mention his name. I thought I was being frum in a big chacham. So on a radio show once in LA, drive time radio, and went very nicely, half-hour show, I think. And afterwards, okay, the end of the interview, somebody was listening said, "Do you know what the host said after you got off?" As soon as I got off, he announces to 200,000 people, he said, "Did you notice that the rabbi couldn't bring himself to say the word Jesus?" After that, I wasn't going to be so frum. I mean, it's mutter halacha. I wouldn't do anything that's asa. So, I hope I don't do anything that's asa.
One question.
Well, 1, 2, and that might 3, 4, and that I think is going to have to be it, right? We ran out of time a long time ago, I think. Yes. Yeah, I wish I could tell you I had a practical strategy for it. I know that if you read Chakira, you will notice in the last couple of issues like a little bit of a subliminal campaign in that direction.
What is Chakira?
Chakira is I think it was originally called the Flatbush Journal of Intellectual Thought. Was the original byline, which people thought was a bad joke. But it turned out it wasn't a joke, it's actually an excellent journal.
Rav Hutner was in Flatbush. Rav Hutner was in Flatbush.
Yeah, Rav Hutner did not contribute to Chakira. Although the Chaim Berlin is on the editorial board.
Oh.
It's very diverse. So there are people who are pushing the idea, even within Flatbush and even in Williamsburg, that it's a complex world. And in America, maybe the thing has to be a scare tactic. Jews are going to lose, in the next couple of decades, a lot of the advantage that they've been accustomed to. I grew up that Erev Pesach, you could count on the city to have an extra garbage pickup, to have bins the days before, to do a beer chametz. We got a lot of groups now competing for political influence. And Jewish influence has waned and will continue to wane. As Jewish population wanes, as Jews don't vote as a bloc, which politicians are now understanding. So a lot of things that we took for granted, us Anglos in the United States, is going to change. When some of those things start happening, there are going to be people around who are going to say, Rabbi Yid, you got to understand, they're on to us. They know who we are. If we treat them, we even think about them contemptuously, they're going to combine upon him. We treat it the same way. So I'm hoping that necessity is going to be the mother of invention. It can't happen without chinuch, without getting to some of the people. I can't tell you that all leaders are ready for this. Some are. You go to Philadelphia, I'm particularly close with by now 3 generations of Kamenetskis. Rav Shmuel Shlita has an American flag outside his house. I saw myself, Rav Shmuel, standing, I was on the street talking to Rav Shmuel, animated conversation. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 2 little black kids from the neighborhood. He ended the conversation, he interrupted the conversation, turned to the kids, started talking to them, and asking how their parents were. So Rav Shmuel gets it. Besides the fact that he's a Baal Musar from Slobodka. So you need the right kind of people. On the other hand, I went to another person who I'm also close with, and talked about the Chilul Hashem epidemic. And he basically said, among my followers, they're not going to hear it. They're just not going to hear it. Today, this was 20 years ago. Today, I suppose some of them are ready to hear it. It's going to be slow. Who was number 2? Lauren.
Apropos of whether a European goy can ever do tshuva, would you say that the example of Georges Picard, who exposed the Dreyfus case and eventually got the news to Emile Zola, certainly puts the lie to the claim that a European goy can never be trusted?
Maybe. I'm a contrarian because my chinuch was in yeshivas. There are lots of people who did nice things for the Jewish people and really hated Jews. The Tiferes Yisrael talks about Chesidium Solom. He includes Johannes Reuchlin. Reuchlin did a lot he saved the Gemara from being burnt. And was it the 16th century? He hated Jews. Learned with the Sforno, even he still hated Jews. There are people who do things because there was a survey, not a survey, a study a number of years ago of non-Jews in Germany who helped Jews. And what was their reason? So there were multiple reasons, but there was one group, the largest group, that just didn't like the idea of being bossed around by this terrible authority figure on the other side. If what he wanted was the Jews dead, he was going to work in the opposite direction. So I don't know, but I think that you can point to lots and lots of other people. I mean, the geiros of children of top Nazi figures was a legitimate geiros, and they're living from lives. Something moved them, so let it be guilt. I don't care, but they did turn around. They did turn around, and I've been in contact over the years with groups. There's a group of Lutheran nuns whose sole mission is friendship with the Jews, and they're not proselytizing. In Germany and in Arizona, they have two places. Wonderful people. Okay, yes, sir. I wish I could tell you I had a magic bullet a magic pill that we could take and cure it all. I don't, and I have something I think is of a little substance. In the end, just like all politics is local, or relationships are local. A lot of people are treated through the press, through media, through social media, through lots of images about Jews. But we have the ability of creating different images in relationships with people one by one. Less of an opportunity here in Israel. If there are a few Anglos here who still commute, certainly those who live in other countries have that opportunity with every interaction, every time they're standing in line at a supermarket, every time that they greet the mailman in the morning. How many stories do we have to hear about non-Jews in the war who put themselves out because they had a good relationship with Jews before and it saved lives? The only way to deal with misinformation is to provide proper information. So Baruch Hashem, there are a lot of Erlich Yidden out there who can make a proper impression. But it has to become a priority for the community. It has to become part of an action plan. Last question.
There are a number of people who study the sociology of religion who attribute the evangelical support of Israel to rapture theology. Let me finish my question.
Sure.
If you would accept that, how would that inform your relationship with evangelicals?
Can you explain the term?
I will explain. There are people who are into vivid depictions of their form of the end game. It's pretty interesting. It reads like a novel. As a matter of fact, Hal, whatever his name is, actually translated it into the Left Behind series. And it was very powerful stuff. People who feel, these are the people who believe that they're literalists about the Bible, and their Bible in particular, and think that the final showdown is going to happen only when all the Jews are brought to Israel, and the second coming can't take place until you have this huge war and the rapture, and so they want all Jews here so that the game can continue the way they want it. By the way, it's not the first time in history that we were in that position. The most famous time that I know of was Menashe ben Yisrael. Menashe ben Yisrael, one of the leaders of Amsterdam Jewry, and the subject of the painting by Rembrandt, who convinced Cromwell that he was blocking the second coming of Jesus. And Cromwell was, what? What's this Rabbi Amsterdam telling me about? He said, look, you believe that biblical prophecy, don't you? He said, of course. He says, well, in the Bible it says that the Jews are going to be scattered to the four corners of the earth. And I'm looking at the globe, and there's one place that doesn't let Jews in. That's right here in England. So unless you let the Jews back in. So we've been in that position. So to answer like the second part of it, I would, for practical reasons, as an Orthodox Jew, I couldn't care less what they believe. If they're proselytizing, that's something else. But I'm not one. I like telling some of my Christian friends that the Jews who object most vociferously for conservative Christians praying for them are Jews who don't pray. Jews who pray realize the Yiboneh Shalom is pretty smart. He can figure out whose prayers to listen to and who's not, or how to listen to everybody's prayers and make them all happy. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is for. So I'm not offended by strong beliefs of people that I disagree with, and I find that usually evangelical Christians are not offended by my strong beliefs. They're actually reassured by it. I used to have a habit every time that one of them would like come real close and say something about Jesus. I would just get just as close and give him a Maimer Chazal Lahavdil. And after a while, you realize he's not going to convert me. So let's just be friends. But it happens to be there are those people out there. In 15 years of working with that community, I have still to meet one person like that. I know they're there. I've met lots and lots and lots of people who don't believe that, who take the same attitude towards evangelizing lahavdil that we did about being a ner lagayim. We'll do it passively, we'll do it by example. We hope that people will get the message. We hope that people will see that we lead good, pious lives and that they'll learn that way. I have no problem with that. Okay, thank you for being an attentive audience.
Shamash, Shir Chadash,